we need Greenland for national security.
So we're going to be doing something with Greenland, either the nice way or the more difficult way.
The idea that a powerful nation can simply point at another land, calculate its value, and decide it should belong to them sounds like something pulled from a centuries-old colonial textbook. Yet, when talk emerged suggesting Greenland could be treated like a real estate deal, the shock wasn't just diplomatic, it was existential. This wasn't merely about ice, minerals, or strategic positioning in the Arctic. It was about whether sovereignty in the modern world still means anything at all. The moment those words entered the global conversation, they ripped open a deeper fear shared across Europe and beyond. That raw power, wrapped in bravado and intimidation, might once again try to bulldoze international norms. What followed was not laughter despite the initial disbelief. Instead, it was a rare, thunderous moment of clarity from leaders who understood what was truly at stake. This was not about one country's ambition. It was about a precedent that could unravel decades of cooperation, alliances, and mutual respect. The reaction from Europe, especially from France, Greenland, and Denmark, carried the weight of history and the urgency of the present. These leaders were not posturing for headlines or shouting into microphones. They were drawing a line in the ice and saying, clearly and collectively, that the era of buying or bullying nations into submission is over. What makes this moment so striking is not just who spoke, but how they spoke. Calm voices replaced chaos. Unity replaced fear. And for perhaps the first time in a long while, the world watched powerful figures stand firm without resorting to insults or threats. That contrast is what makes this story impossible to ignore and impossible to forget. If you want the full story and all the details, stay with us till the end. When the President of France addressed the situation, his words carried far more than national opinion. They echoed the shared anxiety and resolve of Europe as a whole. His message was unmistakable. Greenland is not a commodity, and Europe will not sit quietly while one of its territories is treated as a target.
And Greenland is not to be sold, not to be taken. The situation in Greenland is clearly a wake-up call for all the Europeans.
The gravity of his statement lay in how directly he framed the issue, not as a misunderstanding or miscommunication, but as a strategic message that Europe clearly understood as an encroachment on European land. This framing mattered because it shifted the conversation from speculation to consequence. France's position was not delivered with theatrical outrage. Instead, it was grounded in solidarity and shared values. By emphasizing the common flag and long-standing choices that bind European nations together, the French president reminded both allies and adversaries that Europe's strength lies in unity. This wasn't just symbolic language, it was a deliberate assertion that any move against Greenland would be perceived as a move against Europe itself. That kind of collective framing is powerful because it removes the illusion that pressure can be applied to one nation without repercussions. Equally important was the reassurance directed toward Greenland. The message, "You are not alone," resonated deeply.
Let me tell you very directly that you are not alone.
Not only with Greenlanders, but with smaller nations everywhere that often feel vulnerable in a world dominated by superpowers. France positioned itself not as a savior, but as a partner standing shoulder to shoulder. This distinction is crucial because it reinforces equality rather than hierarchy. It says that protection comes from shared principles, not from domination. As the speech unfolded, it became clear that this was more than a reaction. It was a warning. Europe was signaling that it had learned from history, from moments when silence or division invited aggression. By speaking early and decisively, France helped set the tone for what would follow. A unified rejection of any attempt to undermine sovereignty under the guise of strategy or ambition. If France's message was a continental declaration, the joint stance of Greenland and Denmark was deeply personal and profoundly resolute. Standing together, their leaders made it clear that this was not a theoretical debate, but a lived reality for the people of Greenland. The first words spoken cut through any lingering ambiguity. Greenland is not for sale.
First and foremost, I would like to reiterate, Greenland is not for sale.
That sentence alone dismantled the entire premise of acquisition and reframed the issue as one of dignity rather than negotiation. The emphasis on Greenland's constitutional status within the Kingdom of Denmark was not accidental. By highlighting democratic values and self-government, the leaders reinforced that Greenland's identity is rooted in law, consent, and autonomy. This wasn't Denmark speaking over Greenland, it was Denmark standing with Greenland. That distinction mattered immensely, especially in a moment where external pressure threatened to exploit perceived weaknesses. As the conversation shifted to geopolitics, the tone grew more serious. The acknowledgement of enormous pressure underscored how vulnerable regions can become focal points in global power struggles. Yet even in this acknowledgement, there was no panic. Instead, there was trust in NATO, in European partners, and in the strength of alliances built on mutual respect. The message was clear. Security does not come from being owned or controlled, but from cooperation and shared defense. Perhaps the most striking moment came when the choice was articulated plainly. If forced to choose, Greenland and Denmark chose each other, NATO, the European Union, and democratic values.
And if we must choose between the United States and Denmark here and now, we choose Denmark. We choose NATO. We choose the Kingdom of Denmark. We choose the EU.
This was not framed as anti-American rhetoric, but as a reaffirmation of identity. Greenland would remain Greenland, part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and no amount of pressure would change that.
We choose the Greenland we know today, which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Greenland will not be part of the United States.
The clarity of that declaration left no room for reinterpretation. What made this stance so powerful was its calm confidence. There were no threats, no ultimatums, just an unyielding commitment to self-determination. In a world where louder voices often dominate, this quiet firmness spoke volumes. As these moments played out on the world stage, their impact extended far beyond the Arctic. Together, they formed a lesson in how power can be resisted without chaos and how unity can dismantle intimidation. The denouncements were satisfying, not because they humiliated anyone, but because they reaffirmed a fundamental truth. Sovereignty is not negotiable. The leaders involved did not mirror aggression with aggression. Instead, they stood for freedom, law, and respect, allowing the contrast to expose the weakness of bullying tactics. This is where the narrative takes on a broader meaning. Authoritarian posturing thrives on fear, confusion, and submission. It relies on the belief that smaller nations will eventually bend. But when met with unity, when countries refuse to be isolated or intimidated, that strategy collapses. The image of a loud, aggressive force losing its power when ignored or calmly confronted is not just metaphorical, it is a real dynamic playing out in international relations. The voices of ordinary Greenlanders brought this reality home. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to anger, but beneath it all was a clear rejection of greed and entitlement. What began as something people laughed off quickly transformed into a serious concern, reminding everyone that even absurd ideas can become dangerous if left unchallenged. Their willingness to speak openly showed that this was not just a government stance, but a societal one. In the end, this episode revealed something deeply hopeful. It showed that even in an era marked by division and noise, collective resolve still has the power to stop overreach. It reminded the world that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly, firmly, and together. And in doing so, it sends a message far louder than intimidation ever could. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and drop your thoughts in the comments below.